Welcome to the first episode of the Think Development Out Loud series for 2022. Today we have Dr. Heloise, who is a senior lecturer in the School of Political Science and International Studies at the University of Queensland, Australia. Heloise is interested in the historical and contemporary politics of inequalities and injustices in the organization of development globally. She approaches questions over development from a critical perspective. Her research addresses how knowledge production and representation shape and justify framings of development at a macro-political level and what that means for people. Today she shares her work on the conceptual and theoretical concerns that formed the basis of her interest in the politics of method and in her methodological choices, notably social science staples such as the formal comparative method, its consequences and implications. Her theoretical and analytical approaches are informed by a critical interest in colonialism and its legacies, and post-colonial and decolonial thought and politics. She is also interested in how such insights can contribute to contemporary critical revisions of global public political histories. Her research sits within areas of critical development theory and international relations, politics of the comparative method, critical approaches to human rights and inequality, colonialism, post-colonial relations and decolonial politics, global political economy, finance and development, politics and political economy of microcredit and microfinance, trade, development and inequality, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Her most recent publication in 2021 is as co-author with Philip McMichael on the 7th edition of Development and Social Change, A Global Perspective. Thank you so much for being here, Heloise, and we look forward to hearing about your work.
Thank you so much, Musa Ian, for such a warm and comprehensive introduction. My thanks also to Professor Shireen Rai for the invitation to present in this series. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands upon which I live and work here in Brisbane, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Today, I'll focus on one aspect of my research, which I have already mentioned, the politics of theory and method in development. Methodological choices in development have social and political implications, even if not always explicitly motivated from an ideological perspective. It is important, therefore, to appreciate that theory and methods in development are not neutral but political. Let me illustrate this by way of two specific examples. Microcredit schemes have long been presented as a successful poverty reduction strategy by the World Bank and other international, regional, and national development organizations and agencies. The basis of such a claim has rested on taking repayment rates as the measure of success. However, political anthropologists have revealed that in multiple contexts, repayments have been made by individuals through further indebtedness and impoverishment, sometimes destitution. They have also documented rising violence at the community level as a consequence of peer pressure exerted on borrowers to pay back their loans. This is an example about how what counts as evidence of success in poverty reduction efforts can actually be highly problematic with quite pernicious social and political implications. Let's take a different example, this time to show how methodological choices in how we evaluate issues in development can also be highly problematic. The World Bank's 2011 World Development Report on Conflict, Security and Development has been taken as a key statement on security and development. A close reading of the methods adopted by the World Bank reveals that the analysis is prefigured by a central concern to ensure that order prevails. That is, security is conceptualized as order rather than justice. I will draw from one example from this report to illustrate this broader point. The report evaluates protest against rising food prices through the lens of disorder, which it attributes to weak government effectiveness in developing countries. The report, however, does not state what a strong, effective government response ought to be to address the fact that the price of food which is available is unaffordable. But if one is aware of the policies that the World Bank has advocated since the 1980s, including through structural adjustment programs, for example, then we know that these were quite the opposite of welfare-oriented redistributive policies. I'm thinking here of the work of Walton and Seddon on free markets and food drives, and also Mike Davis's Planet of Slums, that documents rising impoverishment in the context of structural adjustment programs in particular. So from this example, we can discern that the World Bank approaches protest against rising food prices not first and foremost as an issue of social injustice, but rather as a question of disorder. A key policy upshot would then be on ensuring that order prevails, rather than public policy initiatives centered on welfare and redistribution. Something else that comes to mind at this point is the case of the water wars in Cochabamba, Bolivia. Again, when people took to the streets because they couldn't afford to pay for water services which were privatized, the state responded by bringing in the army. So this is to illustrate the point about how we evaluate an issue. Do we come to this through an understanding of the political economy of impoverishment and injustice in development, or what are the consequences of approaching this through the prism of disorder and instability? Let me now briefly illustrate the politics of method in development theory through a critical engagement with the mainstream approach, namely modernization theory. Modernization theory frames development in terms of a logic of stages rather than relations. It does so at the international level, that's between states, as well as within states at the domestic level. At the international level, states are compared and categorized in terms of their relative stage of development. Methodologically, this is ascertained by a way of comparison of states in terms of GDP, which is regarded as the core or one of the core measures of development. This method of comparison and categorization is highly problematic, and it is both descriptive and prescriptive. States are taken, to quote Timothy Mitchell, as objects of development, as if they are freestanding units. What does this mean exactly? It means that so long as the unit is seen to be developing, we don't have to concern ourselves with inequalities and injustices within the unit. We need to ensure that order prevails. Recall here how protests against rising food prices are approached, or protest against, for instance, water privatization. This comparative approach is also problematic for another reason. It means that internal dynamics of states serve as the key explanatory factor of their respective stage of development. This is analytically flawed, as economies are interconnected and have been interconnected both historically and in contemporary contexts. We know that colonialism and its legacies are a key explanatory factor in the making of unequal and unjust relations of development. For example, at the point of decolonization post-1945, many of the post-colonial states inherited colonially constituted economies, whether as producers of primary commodities or with much of their resources claimed to be the property of colonial rulers and their citizens. Colonial violence and dispossession is crucial here. However, we cannot even begin to disclose any of that through the mainstream theoretical and analytical framing of development. A similar stages logic is applied to analysis of development within states. So consider, for example, the argument that sweatshops are a good thing because they indicate that poor women in particular are on the first rung of the metaphoric development ladder. Now, this is an argument made by Jeffrey Sachs, for instance. Here again, injustices and unequal relations are explicitly justified by recourse to a stages logic of development. So framing development and inequalities in development as stages rather than relations. Understanding the implications of framing development in terms of a stages logic reveals the importance of appreciating the link between knowledge and power in development, and the social and political implications of this and the relations it engenders. It reflects an attempt to naturalize those unequal relations by disarticulating relations through a theory of stages, or framing development in terms of a stages logic. At the same time, this approach attempts to naturalize capitalist development through the comparative indicators of progress. So, what I have outlined here has informed my teaching and research, including more recent work on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I have also published specifically on the politics of method in development, including the comparative method. I hope that I have managed to convey, even if in outline, the political significance of method and theory in the politics of development. Again, thanks so much for the opportunity to participate in this series. I really appreciate it. Thank you.